part of that thinking, right, is to make us think that the word craft is considered less than, and I think us using it as talking
Right.
about the process
Yes.
of making art instead of it being like the finished product, like, that's a craft. I mean, I think that
Mhm.
we have to own that word and take it back. So, I mean, I think it's important for us to still use it because
Mhm.
it can be a craft. The process of making it, it's important. So, use that word.
Hello, makers. Welcome to Making Conversation, a podcast where we chat all about making, the app and the act. I'm Jen, head of marketing for Making. My pronouns are she, her, and my Making app username is Knit Pearl. We've followed today's guests for a while now, and she's also been a part of the Making app community. And her posts in the feed always put a smile on my face, just make me so happy. The colors and everything. One day I got a DM from my friend Cheryl, who I actually met through another friend's podcast called TBTL. And she sent a giant paragraph on why she loves today's guest, why she loves her art, why I should have her on the podcast. And I was like, duh, that makes so much sense. So here we are. Welcome,
Oh my gosh,
Hannah.
you're gonna make me cry.
I mean, that's not the goal, but I'm a Cancer, Pisces, Cancer, so we are free
Oh,
to
yeah.
cry here if you need, because I'm surprised I haven't done it more, to be honest, on this podcast.
I love that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having
Hi.
me. My name is Hannah Austin. My pronouns are she, her. My username on almost every platform is needle or thread. Sometimes it's needle underscore or underscore thread, but if you type in needle or thread, I will pop up. And fun fact, or in my name stands for Oregon, the abbreviation of the state that I live in. I live in Eugene, Oregon. I have been doing my business. I started it in February of 2019, so I'm coming up on my 5th year, which is wild. But I've been making things forever.
Mhm.
My grandmother taught me how to quilt and embroider and hand sew and paint and draw, all the things, which I feel like a lot of us had a matriarch somewhere in our family that taught us everything. But I started doing it as a side project. Like, I had too many projects in my house, and I was like, they're going to keep compiling. I need to get rid of them. So maybe I'll start an Etsy. And then that just spiraled. And then I went full time in July of 2020. And I specialize in landscape fabric collages, which there are some around me. I
Wow.
do embroidery, but I'm mostly known for the fabric collage aspect of my pieces, but I hand sew everything. And I somehow have not gotten sick of it yet, so I'm still loving it.
Your journey as a maker started, it sounds like when you were very young, your grandma was like, "Here's
Yeah.
some needle and thread."
Yeah, so my grandmother, you can't really tell looking at me. I'm Norwegian and Swedish and Korean, but the Korean side kind of wins over, but I came from a very Scandinavian heavy family, and so my grandmother was like a Scandinavian wood painter. So, like, the Dala horses, the very, like, intricate scroll painting work, that was what she did, and I went to visit her a lot. Like, I did summers with her and vacation time, anytime I could. She's my favorite person, and her house was, like, home to me. I'm from a military family, so we moved a lot, but her house was, like, always the same, and I would, like, get all up in her business, and she'd get so annoyed with me because I'd, like, shake the table, and she's, like, trying to do this delicate painting. And so she taught me how to embroider and to quilt so that I would leave her alone when she was creating, which hindsight is kind of as funny to me, but yeah, so I started with embroidering, like, tea towels, and I want to try and recreate them and, like, modernize them someday. It's a project I'd love to do, but it was, like, little kittens doing household chores, and it's, like, Monday, and it's, like, a little cat, and she's, like, ironing, and then Tuesday was, I think, washing dishes. Wednesday was, like, a little cat dusting. It's hilarious. They're hilarious, and I still have them.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yay! That I
Yeah.
love that. I love
So,
that.
I'm probably, like, 8 or 9 years old when she first taught me, and then I was mostly a quilter, and I loved quilting. It was a lot of fun. I didn't do the actual, like, I did my own very basic quilting. I didn't do, like, long arm quilting, but I did all the piecing and stuff, and when I had children, it was no longer, like, logistically possible for me to piece an entire quilt on my living room floor anymore because,
Yeah.
babies. So I started doing like landscape. I kind of called them like mini quilts at first because I was like, well, I can still make landscape quilts, just make them on like a really small scale. And then it just happened. And now it's like my own I don't know, it's weird. I put myself into a niche and I didn't know I was doing it at the time. I'm very thrilled that it went well and that it was well received. So crazy.
Looking at your art, there is an obvious inspiration, right?
Just a touch.
Yes. Do you wanna kind of start with, like, where that came from? And then I also wanna know, is there any inspiration that might be unexpected?
Oh, ooh, I like that question. So I
Thank you.
moved. So I like to call Chicagoland my home base, which is a little strange, but that's like the most time I spent in a place growing up. I went to school in the Chicago suburbs. So that's kind of, I call it home, even though I moved around a lot. And when I met my husband in college, who also was from the Chicago suburbs, we slowly moved a little bit further west into Iowa. Not that different though, it's still the Midwest. And then he got into a PhD program here at University of Oregon, and it was like, well, our kids are little, who cares? Let's do it. Let's move across the country. But we did it in a way
Yeah.
where he still had summers off. He was a school psychologist, so he worked during the school year. And I was staying home with our, at the time, 2 children. And so we had a really beautiful blessing of time. So we took like a month and a half or something to move across the country from the Midwest to get to Eugene, Oregon. And we like visited a bunch of national parks and we spent time with friends and family that we don't get to see very often. And we got to show our kids just the really gorgeous part of the country. And I took so many pictures. I mean my phone memory was like it was just storage was gone. It was all pictures and we went
Yeah.
we went from my oldest being very clumsy walking to, like, running while he was hiking towards the end. It was really beautiful. It was a great bonding experience,
Oh.
yeah, and our youngest was, I think, like, 8 months, so one of us was carrying him at all times, and gosh, our country is so pretty. I mean, I tell people all the time, like, I was inspired by a cross-country move, but I don't think people realize, like, I I don't remember how many national parks we stopped in, but it was just so pretty. And then my favorite thing to tell people
Mhm.
is when we moved into Oregon, when you cross the border, there's, like a state sign. It's like, "Welcome to Oregon." We got out, we took our pictures with it. We're
Yeah.
like, "We're here." But there's still a long drive from the border
Yeah.
coming west, right? And
Mhm.
I had no clue that the eastern part of our beautiful state is desert. It's like volcanic and it is arid, it is dry. I had no clue. I pictured,
Yeah.
and people will get upset with me. I promise I know better now. But in the Midwest, we played a computer game on our computers and we called it the Oregon Trail. I know it's Oregon, but we called it the Oregon Trail. And I associated Oregon with being this like lush green, beautiful. I had no idea. So we start driving.
Very pixelated,
Yes.
oxen
Yes.
everywhere,
But, like,
like,
you don't
people dying of dysentery.
yes. But, like, still, I viewed Oregon as being this, like, lush promised land, right? Like, that's why people went on this Oregon Trail. And then we're driving, and I was like, what is this? Is this we're moving here." We didn't visit at all before we decided to move, okay? So we're, like, driving, and we're both like, "What is happening?" There's, like, no gas stations, there's no people for miles and miles, and then you get all the way up to, like, Bend, Oregon, and it, like, crests over, and all of a sudden you see, like, the Willamette just, like, mountain rate like, the valley, and it's like we cried. And, like,
Yeah.
as cheesy
It
as
was
that sounds,
like,
it's just,
uh,
like it's that beautiful scene
like,
yes! It's the beautiful scene in, like, every dinosaur movie, where, like, The Land Before
yes.
Time when, like, they get to the beautiful, like, promised part at the very end and, like,
Yeah.
the sun is shining through the trees and everything is green. That was our experience. And I just try my hardest to capture that in, like, every piece that I make. I also really enjoy the Northern Lights. I was privileged enough to see those when I was really little one time, and they've stuck with me, and you can sometimes see them here. So that's another little inspiration, but it's mostly just mountains, the really pretty vistas, the ocean. I just love this state so much. Like, I have no plans on ever returning to the Midwest. My family's not so happy about that, but the fact that there's so many different typographies within, like, a 3-hour drive is incredible to me, and the amount of just
Mhm.
pretty places that I can take my kids to on, like, any given day if I we just need to take a trip somewhere. I am a big fan of just, like, nature documentaries too, so sometimes if I see a nature documentary and there's, like, a clip of, I don't know, like, some like, a Sahara Desert or something, wow, that's really pretty, I'll try and, like, take a mental picture of it and then, like, recreate it if I can. I do have these 2 that are behind me, which I guess at this angle you can't tell as much, but this one has a sun that's a little bit higher and that one has a sun that's a little bit lower. But I actually cut the
Oh,
fabric the
yeah.
exact same way in those 2, and I guess if and I haven't done them in a while, and I'm hoping to bring them back, but my youngest was, supposed to be a twin, and we lost his twin in utero about halfway through, and I had a really hard time with my
So sorry.
Oh, thank you. I had a really hard time with my grief, but
Yeah.
I joined a couple grief groups, and I found out that a baby lost in utero in a twin pregnancy is called a sunset baby, and the baby that survives is called a sunrise baby. And so I do have a couple sets that are like that, where I sold those to women who were grieving with their own journey of loss. And I haven't made them in probably 2 years, so I probably should make more, but that was my grief journey, and those have nothing to do with Oregon, that was just me processing, and I used fabric from my grandmother in both of them to, like, tie it all in because the
Oh.
other part about that is that my grandmother died the day after my surviving twin was born, so it was all yeah, yeah, it was a lot. A lot to
Oh my
process. Yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
She, like, waited until you had, like,
Yes.
this, level of love that you would
Yes.
never feel
Yeah.
in any other way. Yeah.
Like, could feel I felt it, like, when she passed, and then, like, my phone rang, and
Mhm.
I had a feeling.
Wow.
When I was in labor with my youngest, my dad had called and was like, "She's not doing so great, like, how are you?" And I was like, "I'm, like, in the throes of labor here, like, I'm, you
Yeah, yeah,
know,
I'm a little busy.
but, like, thanks for letting me know," I had texted them saying, like,
Yeah.
I'm hoping this baby comes soon," and then he was born, and I FaceTimed them because they're in Minnesota, where my grandma was from. My dad moved back to his hometown to take care of her in her final years, and they still
Mhm.
live there. But, yeah, and so I FaceTimed, and she was pretty much I mean, a lot of end of life, there's not much activity, right? But she, like, opened her eyes, and she
Yeah.
smiled and nodded, and, like, we were all crying and everything, and then the next morning when I woke up, I just had this feeling, and then my dad called, and so it does feel like she was making sure that he had arrived and that she, like, let me know, "Hey, things are gonna be okay," and then I like to think she, like, is watching over my other kiddo. I think I've made maybe 6 sets of them, so I think 5 of them exist outside of my home, but those are probably 2 of the pieces that I won't ever sell them. They're for my personal collection,
Mhm.
and they
Yeah.
just kind of remind me that, like, everybody that we meet, usually in the art world, I feel like everybody has some kind of moment or a thing that happened, but art is so therapeutic, and it really does help with grief. Like, I feel I can talk about it a lot without, like, sobbing. Like, if I just even mentioned, like, Quinn was supposed to be a twin, I'll just start bawling, but I and it's helped. I can talk about it now, and I can say, "Hey, look, I made these beautiful things out of, like, a terrible situation," and it helps kind of ground me.
I've never been in that situation, but I know people who have and or similar
Yeah.
situations with losing children. I feel like nobody ever talked about it for a very long time, and you sharing your story is gonna help somebody
Oh,
else,
yeah. I like
with
to think so.
their grief as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I'm pretty
yeah.
open about it, and I talk about it a lot, like, I have
Mm.
a pinned post on my, social media that's, like, me holding the hoops, and I talk about it pretty openly because I there is kind of, like, a taboo around child loss or miscarriage or infertility, like, people just don't wanna talk about those things, it's like, I don't know, because it makes other people feel uncomfortable. And when questions arise
Mhm.
around motherhood of like, when are you going to start a family? Or like, oh, are you going to have another? And you never know what those families are experiencing. And if they even want children, I mean, the assumption is always that everybody wants a kid, which it's totally fine for people to not want children.
I'm in that camp.
Yeah.
I'm born to be the best auntie in the
Yes.
entire world, and my children are my dogs and cat.
Yes. And that's,
And that is all I
and
want. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, and that was the other thing. Like people never
Yeah.
could talk about not wanting kids. It's like, well, why?
Yeah.
Who's gonna take care of you when you get older? It's like
Oh my
people
gosh,
that
that makes me s
people that
I'm
are
like,
paid to help. Like, are you saying we're only supposed
yeah,
to have
like
kids so that they can take care of us and wipe our butts later? That makes zero sense. I totally respect.
that is,
Yeah.
not correct.
Yeah. My children, my sister-in-law, who's like one of my best friends, she doesn't want any kids, and my kids benefit. They get the coolest aunt, and she does all of the fun things, and she's gonna be the one that they go and have amazing experiences with and do maybe naughty things,
Mhm.
like they can go and eat all the candy and do the crazy
Yeah.
stuff. I feel like a lot of things in
Mhm.
modern culture, especially with social media, have kind of moved conversations forward in a way that benefits everybody and brings back the humanity in just,
Mhm.
like, being open about everything in our lives. And so growing a
Yeah.
family or not growing a family or, like, fertility issues and stuff, that's all stuff that we should be talking about. I don't know why it's ever been
Mhm.
taboo because it's part of the human
Yeah.
experience. It's like not talking about when people are
Mhm.
born or, like, any other major life event. I
Yeah.
I just don't get it. I think it's important for us to talk about
Yeah.
all of it.
Every time that at least, like, personally, I've shared something that might be a little bit difficult, multiple people be like, "Thank you for sharing that." Like,
Yeah,
now I don't feel alone, and I think that that is the internet can be a very scary place, but on the flip side, it can also be this beautiful place where we come together as community and, share our stories and share our grief together and share our happiness together and all of this, so
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if it
yeah,
helps even one person, it was worth having the conversation. And for the people that say, "Oh, that's
100%.
cringy, you're oversharing." It's like, "Well, that's a you problem." I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah, then just keep
Yeah,
scrolling.
has nothing
That's
to do
you
with
don't need to
you.
read it then.
Exactly.
Goodbye. Yeah.
Yeah. So the plus side though, I think totally outweighs anybody who might want to be vocal about how they don't agree, and that's fine. I had my baby in November of 2019. I celebrated his 100th day, which is like a huge thing in Korean culture, and then like the whole world shut down the next week. So I was pretty miserably pregnant for most of the beginning year of my business. It was very I mean, and it was really just friends and family saying like, "I think you should sell these, stop giving them away. I think people wanna buy them. I would buy them." And then I was like, "Fine." And I launched and I had a pretty decent reaction from the get-go, which was nice. And then when 2020 happened, like many people, I had anxiety around, like, every
Yeah.
just existing. I feel like
Yeah.
anybody
Yep.
who, like,
Yep.
is, like, aware of just, like, the state of humanity at the time. So I made masks.
Yeah.
So I did. I switched in March. I switched from making my art to I shut everything down, and I was one of the people that was like, "I have all of this fabric. I'm gonna make masks." And so I made
Amazing.
like a 5,000 masks, which yeah. Yeah,
5,000?
I made so many
Okay,
masks.
how long
I got it.
did you, like, add up the hours of what it
No,
was
I
that
probably
took you,
should,
like
but I got down to a point
you
where I had,
should.
like
I'm
it was like an
curious.
assembly line, like I did step 1 of, like, every single mask,
Yeah.
and I chained them all together. I got it down to where I could make 1 mask in about 12 minutes because I was just very speedy about it, and I sewed, like, 24/7. I think my dining table was no longer a dining table, that was like a sewing station for me. Because otherwise I would, like, lose my mind. I'd cry, I'd get so nervous because I had 3 young children and, I mean, nobody knew anything, right? So, I made masks for, like,
Mhm.
a year and a half, and I would make a hoop every once in a while. I even made some art masks that had my landscapes on them when I, like,
Oh, I love
needed a little
that.
creative
Oh my
break,
goodness.
but, yeah, so, my business
Yeah.
in a weird way, grew also because of the masks, because then people are like, "You have cute prints," before we knew that fabric masks maybe weren't the best, right? So and then I just got lucky because when was like, "I can't make masks anymore. I'm gonna switch back," those people stayed. So that was the nice part about it was that even though I had kind of switched a little bit and I have no intention of making another fabric mask ever again because
You don't need
yeah,
to.
it was a lot, but
You don't need to. Yeah.
but
You've done enough. You've done
yeah,
enough.
so
Yeah.
I didn't I but I think my business grew because of that whole, like, boom of 2020 where all of a sudden everybody's locked inside, people can't go anywhere, The only experiences they have are through looking on their phones and their tablets. And I mean, I think so many of us felt this huge boom of like art appreciation all of a sudden, like music and movies
Mhm.
and visual art was all of a sudden like, and we couldn't get enough, right? So I totally
Mhm.
benefited from that. And I do think that and it was like this magical growth time for so many people where all of a sudden it was like, wow, okay, I'm doing this full time now because people want it.
So you also teach as well,
Yes.
as Cheryl said in her direct message that
I
she's
love
taken a
that.
class with you before.
Oh, she's the absolute best. So University of Oregon, like many places, shut down a lot of programs during the pandemic. And one of the things that when they started amping back up, they have this amazing center. It's called the Craft Center. And I want to say there's like 10 in the nation at the collegiate level where it's in the student union building, it's in the basement, and it's like every maker's dream. You walk in and there's like a fiber studio, a photography studio, a metalsmith studio, a wood shop, a glass studio, like pottery, painting, screen printing, like anything you can think of. Yes.
Wow.
And these students at University of Oregon, I feel like not nearly enough of them take advantage because they just go in and they turn in their ID and it's like free for them and they can just go and make things and take classes. It's amazing.
One day they'll look back and regret.
Right? I mean, every single time I'm in there, I'm like, "What? It's like a kid in a candy store." It's phenomenal, and there are
Yeah.
these experts that are dressed up in just, like, casual clothes, just existing there. The staff there, it's like you would never know because 'cause they're just so, like, chill and laid back about it, but they're all, like, phenomenal artists, and they're so talented, and you just, like, those kids, those college kids, they don't know how amazing it is. But they invited me to come be a visiting artist. So this is a program they were bringing back where they would bring in an artist, and then that artist's artwork would be featured in the student union, and then there would be an artist talk, a question and answer kind of session, and then workshops, and then students can go and learn from this, like, expert in a field. And I was super lucky to be asked to be the first one when they returned back from the pandemic. So I did that last winter,
Nice.
and it was so much fun. I would go and, like, hang out and just work there because I just wanted to get to know students, and I got to know the staff really well, and I was supposed to teach 1 or 2 workshops, and that morphed into, like, 4. And my artwork was displayed upstairs, and I got to meet a lot of wonderful people, and then all of a sudden it turned into, "Hey, do you wanna just, like, be an instructor with us?" And I, like, fell out of my chair. I was so excited. So, yeah.
Yay!
So now I yeah, which
Wonderful.
is such a cool experience. So now I teach fabric collage classes. So what I do, I bring in, and if I could show you right now in my office, just bins of fabric scraps. People send them to me, which I love. I rarely turn down fabric scraps if people are like, "I'm just gonna throw this away." I will almost always take it. And I take these bins of fabric with me
Mhm.
and I let students take as much as they want. And then I bring in like, all of my embroidery thread and my beads and sequins, and I just walk through the very basics of what I do, and then for, like, 2 hours, they just get to make and have fun, and I walk around and help. And then I do, like, an embroidery 101 class, and then I also teach a, like, beginning social media for artists course. And I love it. It's super fun. They asked me to teach this last year, and I was like, I don't like, I'm not an expert." And they were like, "Well, no, you've had success on social media. You should talk about it. Like, you went from being a nobody to all of a sudden supporting your family and I make more than I made as a full-time teacher, which is incredibly sad. I mean, it
Mhm.
says a lot about what we
Yeah.
pay our teachers." They convinced me to finally teach it, and I basically am going into it with the understanding that, like, what worked for me may not work for someone else, and there are outside factors, obviously, but
Mhm.
the biggest takeaway is to consistently show up and know your audience and just try to be as authentic as possible and be very clear in your abilities, because if you show up on social
Mhm.
media, like, maybe doubting yourself a little bit, they just jump at you. Everyone
Yeah.
has imposter syndrome unless they're a narcissist. Like, everyone
100%.
everyone has a touch of it, and you just have to, like, "No, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna just quiet that
Mhm.
voice, and I'm gonna make what I wanna make, and people love that if you just go in
Yeah.
like, "I know what I'm doing."
Oh my gosh. I feel like over this last week, there have been a few conversations online that I've been a part of where women specifically, or female presenting people, they think that a lot of their success is due to luck, and they attribute their success to luck. And I used to be that person too until somebody said, no, you've worked hard to get where you are.
Yeah.
And there was somebody that posted something on LinkedIn about luck, and I basically have told, like, 2 different women this week that they're not allowed to say that it's because of
Yeah.
luck.
We
Yeah.
all experience luck. That is just, like, part of the human experience, but that doesn't like,
Yeah.
I don't think some people are more lucky than others. I think it's how much work you put in,
Mm-mm.
and just
Mhm.
if you invest in your skill set and invest in yourself, like, think of yourself as the biggest investment ever and really hone in on whatever you are choosing to go into, and then you consistently show up, things will happen. And I
Mhm.
I just it's all that's just the patriarchy. Our beautiful capitalist
I know.
society just shoving its way in there to
No.
just put women in their place, which is we're
Speaking of the
yeah,
patriarchy, let's talk
yeah.
about what we're gonna talk about today.
Yes.
So, the good old topic of art versus craft. It is an interesting one,
Yeah.
especially in the space of, like, the making app. I think about this a lot because we're multi-craftual
Mhm.
and, many different types of makers in our app. So we got to know you a little bit. I'm sure we're gonna get to know you a little bit better through this
Yeah.
conversation. We're gonna talk about more about art versus craft and how the community is shifting the dialogue and understanding and diving a little bit deeper also into how women-centric art forms slash crafts have been considered inferior to those traditionally done by men, et cetera, et cetera. So I posted actually in the making app a question for people. And so I want to read a few of those answers. But first, of course, as every week, we have to give some props to some people who have posted their art in the making app. So what did
Absolutely.
you find this week that was inspiring?
So, I think it's because I'm a quilter by trade. I highly enjoy the satisfaction that I get from scrolling and seeing people's quilted works and I am a full-blown fall basic lady. I will always champion autumn, especially in Oregon. It is so good. And so I love every fall theme
Mhm.
thing. So Jennifer K posted a beautiful pumpkin table runner that she quilted, and I die. It's like fall perfection. And it makes me want to quilt again, but my sewing machine is very sad and in a closet and needs to be serviced, so I'm not going to. But, oh, it's so pretty.
Love
I
it.
love a good functional art piece, which is part of the conversation we're gonna
Oh,
have
yeah.
today.
So what is this person's handle in the making app?
Her making app handle is Jennifer K.
Oh, perfect.
Jenniffer
Okay.
Kay, which my middle name is Kay, so that's
Cool.
another fun little thing.
My middle name starts with a
Oh,
K.
look at that. All
So
the connections.
Janet Loves Yarn.
Mhm.
She posted a pattern called the Orange Shirt Garland, and she had designed this, and it is a garland that says "Every child matters"
Oh,
to kind of give a nod to the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is coming up in
yes.
Canada.
Yeah.
That day honors the children who never returned home
Mhm.
and survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. They're little orange T-shirts, and then each one has the letter of every child matters. And you can find that free download in the Making app in Janet's shop.
It's
So,
beautiful. I'd found
um,
her and followed her right away.
thank you, Janet, for sharing that in the Making app shop. We love it. Just a reminder to for everyone, like, know the land that you're on and the history of it, and that's always very
It
important.
is, yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about fine art versus craft and all of the things around it. I did pull a little history because
Mm.
I feel like this I mean, it just goes so far back,
It's the
like,
misogyny
as
runs
most
deep.
things do. It goes far.
It does.
So if we go all the way back to medieval European workshops, this could be metalsmithing, hat makers. There would be like a leader, an experienced person, and they would follow guild guidelines. And the goal would be to get apprentices to build on their skills over the years. And makers would be valued for their talents, but there were no like standout people,
Yeah.
right? There was no like one person is famous woodworker for doing this, celebrity status, etc.
I don't think people realize that the term
Yes.
fine art was coined in, like, the 18th century and that it's, like, so the whole process, the thought behind it is so
Yeah.
old. I don't think people people know that.
So
Yeah.
old. So old. Okay, so, like, around 1400 in Florence, Italy was kind of the beginning of
Yeah.
Renaissance humanism, right? And, like, the big thinkers of Florida.
That's what they called Florence back in the day.
The big thinkers of Florida. Yeah, I know, right? Dear Lord. Oh, Florida man started that's where Florida man came from, actually, the
It's
14th okay.
art.
Uh, the big thinkers of Florence started spreading the idea that we should be placing a bigger emphasis on individual creativity.
Yeah.
So again, this is like super high level. Like Hannah said, there's a million things that we could like dive into and all of that. But a man named Giorgio Vasari published a book
Mhm.
called Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, which then kind of created this level of celeb status for painters and
Yeah.
architects. So, what's interesting about this though is like, okay, so Giorgio was a friend of like Michelangelo,
Yeah.
right? Who benefited from this very much. If I was a famous author back then and my best friend did cool stuff, I would also wanna write about it and,
Yep.
like, make them
Yeah.
famous. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like, was it really a malicious patriarchy thing at that time when he's writing the book? Like, I wanna know. I wanna know if he was like, "Ah, ha, ha, I'm gonna game the system," and or like, "I just wanna talk about my bestie in this book."
Yeah, I mean, I want to believe in, like, the humanity and, like, just, like, wanting to support your friend, but then I also think, like, women weren't allowed to do the things that they were doing to even be a part of the conversation, and that in itself is the
Yeah,
patriarchy. So, like, regardless of the
yeah.
intent behind it, it still already was super classist and racist and, like,
Mhm. Oh, yes.
all of the "ists" that you can think of because inherit like,
Yeah,
there were a
yeah.
bunch of white men deciding for everybody
Yeah.
else.
All of the ists were wrapped up in almost everything
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
then. I mean, specifically in the Western world and, like, Western world culture
Yeah.
and all of essentially, after, the rise of the popularity of painters and architects and them coming to this celebrity status, like, the remainder of the people who worked hard on making beautiful things such as ceramics and metalwork and jewelry were now considered
Yeah.
artisans and their art was not as important and often called decorative arts. So that kind of solidified the difference between art and
Yeah.
craft in the Western world again,
Yeah.
we're talking about. Now, in many other cultures, there is no art and
No.
craft. There's no such
Yeah.
distinction. And when art historians of the 19th century looked at works of these other cultures like rugs and vases, they just assumed that they were not innovating because the people who were creating these things in these other cultures wanted to simply honor
Mhm.
traditions of how these things were made, and they didn't care about
Yeah.
innovation or evolving or whatever, whatever these 19th century art historians were looking
Yeah.
for. So, like, that's kind of specifically where the racism comes in. I mean, it was already there, but,
Yeah.
like, it really flows in during that
It
moment.
does.
So it's, like, very much men controlling the
Mhm.
narrative, lifting up other men.
The distinction that was made then that if something was functional, if it had a besides, like, just being beautiful, if it had some sort of a function, then all of a sudden it wasn't in the same class as art for art's sake. And that divisiveness that had
Mhm.
happened automatically devalued the work of all of those people, even though most of the people who make those, like, functional decorative pieces, true like professionals. I mean, they are artisan in the best form. They dedicate so many hours of their life to be able to create something, and then that piece usually took so long to create, and then it was like, well, it's just not the same. It's not the same caliber as something that
Yeah.
which isn't to say that paintings and sculptures and architecture aren't art. They totally are, but just all of a sudden having to put a divisive line to somehow categorize things and make certain art forms more or less than truly is like the epitome of that classist belief that like there has to be a distinction when the reality is you can slap a banana on the wall and that is art because art is subjective, like that anything can be art.
Yeah.
I think it impacts the most women and then even more female presenting
Mhm.
creators of color. And I think unfortunately, we've lost so much of, like, the rich history and, like, the preservation of a lot of those art forms because of the fact that they weren't considered as important. So, like, we didn't work hard to, like, keep those in
Mhm.
pristine condition and put them in museums and, like, talk about them. And then they just didn't have the same level of fame because they weren't
Yeah.
in that same caliber.
I do think that a lot of art museums are shifting the narrative,
Totally.
and you do see a lot of these things
Absolutely.
being presented now,
Now.
right?
Yeah.
But it took how long did it take for that to
A
happen,
long
right?
time. Yeah.
And when it comes to, like, women of color, I mean, the intersectionality, not only is it art versus craft, but it's female crafts like textile arts and
Yes.
male crafts
Yes.
like
Yeah.
woodworking, which is all bullshit.
Yes. Oh
Mhm.
my gosh, yes.
But then bringing in the intersectionality of it,
Yeah,
it's like women of color who typically create these things, they can face an even further devaluation of their work
totally. Yeah.
because of society and the
Yeah.
patriarchy, right? How can we continue breaking down this barrier? Because you're very passionate about talking about this stuff
Yeah.
and changing the narrative. So, within our communities, what have you seen that's been happening, and what can we do further to continue to break this down?
The horrors that happened in 2020 that were televised, police brutality against Black bodies and brown bodies, and, like, all of that turmoil that happened all of a sudden because we were all not able to go outside, all of a sudden, we're all on the internet all the time, and then people are I mean, it was really this, like, flurry of stuff that was happening. I think one of the hopeful things that came out of that experience was that all of a sudden we were talking about elevating Black voices, elevating people of color, and there was this huge boom of people all of a sudden, like, taking a step back and, like, sharing and uplifting other people's artwork that are people of color, are women, are usually people that are not given that space, and I think that that was, like, such a beautiful moment in history, but then, of course, it was, like, almost performative. It became like a thing, like, "I'm an ally," and all of a sudden people, like, did it for maybe
Mhm.
a week or so, and that was it. And so I think, like, one of the parts and I struggle with, like, the definition of people of color because I am half Korean. I am considered BIPOC, but then I also am white. So I have, like, this inner turmoil of, like, whether or not I consider myself to be someone that should, like, be moving forward or if I should be taking a step back. And so I think, like, a huge part of this
Mm.
conversation, like, at the rudimentary level that we need to be doing is we just need to make sure that we step aside and that we're promoting and elevating people that are creating art that maybe have their flames taken out a little too soon, right? Because of just, like, the color of their skin and because of classism and racism. So, I think that's, like, the most important thing. Just searching for artists,
Mhm.
other artists and makers that do happen to be people of color, especially if it's rooted in the history of, like, where they come from, like, their origin stories. I think that's, like, a huge thing. Like, if we all just took the time to have discussions about certain people's art, just, like, sharing it to our stories on social media, following accounts, listening to them, I think that's a huge part. And then also when we are in the process of creating, I think we need to be having our own personal conversation of, am I respectful if I'm trying another art form, especially if it's from a different culture? Am I being respectful in my approach or am I
Mhm.
appropriating whatever that art form is? So, I think that's another part, right? Like that we have to be very aware
Yeah.
of how we approach certain art forms and make sure that we are still tying it back to whoever should be getting recognition for that. I think so many art forms are like, especially nowadays, I think are pulling from a lot of different areas. But I do think if we, if especially if
Mhm.
it's specific, like trying to think of an art form that like would be
Beading?
yes, beading for yeah, that's an easy one from like indigenous cultures, right? Uh, I I think just
Mhm.
being super respectful and being aware of like A, who you learn from, I think that's important, right? Like if you are choosing to take classes, if you're choosing to buy material or check out books from the library to learn about that, for example, beading, I think it's important that those where you are getting your information from, where you are getting your background from would be from the people of that culture. And that if you do decide that you
Mhm.
want to try your hand at making them and then selling them, that you make sure that you like own that that art form did come from someone else and maybe make donations. Like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to get paid for your hard work because obviously you are the one creating whatever that item is. But I do think like reparations are important. Like, I try and donate 10% of my sales every month as like to other platforms or causes that I think are underrepresented as my way of saying like, "Hey, I know that I have some white privilege and I probably should give back a little bit and I have the ability to do so because my stuff is selling." I'm not saying that
Mhm.
everybody has to do that, but I do think it's just the awareness and like trying really hard not to like make it seem like you're the one that just came up with everything on your own. 'Cause we do all learn from other
Mhm.
people. I
Mhm.
think we all gather information from other people and from other cultures. We just have to make sure that we do it in a respectful way.
Mhm. I'm gonna read some of these later, because I know that you have to go soon.
Oh, yeah.
I asked the question in the Making app, if we were to get rid of the words art and craft and just start over, what should we call it?
Oh.
And, there's some interesting things in here.
It's such a huge topic,
Yeah.
and everybody's take is probably a little different on it. I think the biggest takeaway is that for me, if whatever you are creating is been made purposefully, and if it's made to evoke some sort of a reaction or feeling from someone else, then it's art. That's kind of my takeaway. Like,
Mhm.
if I were to,
Mhm.
just, like, write down, like, a list of my groceries, I wouldn't necessarily call that art, but if I'm intentionally writing down words to evoke feeling from someone else in the base of, like, a short story or a poem, then that's art. It's just
Mhm.
super important for us to be able to take back, especially for women, that what we are making, especially if it takes forever. I'm looking at you, anybody who's like quilting or knitting, the art forms that take like 25 to 30 hours of your life and the cost of materials is
Yeah.
not cheap. The slow crafts, right? Like those it I think a
Mhm.
huge part of this movement that's happening, and I'm really excited about it, is that all of a sudden we're realizing, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't just give my quilt to someone for $50 that took me 75 hours to make." Or maybe this
Oh,
embroidery
yeah.
piece that I made and I spent 20 hours on, maybe I shouldn't sell that for $30. Like, the fact that we're having those conversations and being aware that we should be getting paid for the time that it takes to not only make that thing, but plan the thing and package the thing, all of that. It's, I'm seeing people are finally starting to be aware of that. Not saying that people can't price their things lower. I understand that some people want to make sure that things are affordable, but
Mhm.
it's important that we all make that step and that we all move forward in thinking about pricing if we're selling because it impacts everyone else in our community. If
Mhm.
one person is raising their prices and they're getting paid, like, let's say $15 an hour, and all of a sudden that price seems like hundreds of dollars more, it looks like they are charging way too much when the reality is they just want to try and make like a decent wage on something that they're making. I just want people to realize like pricing your pieces does not just impact you, it impacts the community that you are a part of. And we all have to make steps in thinking about our pricing in order to benefit everyone and to keep the trajectory going so that we can
Mhm.
start valuing our art. Because if you're selling it for cheaper, I do think that that impacts whether or not someone says that's fine art or not, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I think that
So,
there's also a difference between somebody who has, like, specifically said, "Okay, I am able and willing to create this art at a lower price point to be able to reach a larger audience," right?
yeah.
Versus somebody
Yeah.
saying, "I have to do this at a lower price point or nobody will buy it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like I don't want it to shame people if they feel comfortable having their pricing, but I do think there are
Mhm.
so many creators that are out there that want to sell things and then they get discouraged because it's like, well, that took me so long to make and then I only made this much. Like, why is it even worth it? And then they give up. And
Mhm.
that breaks my heart so much because I've
Yeah.
I there are many of us that are living proof that if you just go in very confidently and you are sure of yourself and you're sure of your skills and you explain to people why your pricing is the way that it is, people will respect it. And then you can be successful at it because I could be selling my pieces at $10 for
But
one
you
that took
should
me
not.
20 hours. But I'm not, and I'm able to still sell my artwork, and I think that, like, there's a buyer out there that's going to see the worth of the piece that you are making. You just have to figure out a way to reach them and be
Mhm.
patient.
How you define art is, something that's created to provoke emotion in others. I also think that part of it is provoking emotion in ourselves too, right?
Oh,
Like,
totally. Yes.
I knit because sorry, I'm touching this because I did just knit this and it is its
Oh, it's
first wear. So
beautiful.
I've been like, "Yeah, that's soft."
So soft.
That's so soft. But I think it's like, this is art to me because not only did I make it and I can wear it, and that is just really, really cool, but, like, how much does my crafting help with my mental health and help
Oh,
make me
totally.
happy and give me,
Yeah.
somebody who has the ADHD where I feel like I can't sit down and I have to keep going. It gives me a time to pause and rest, right? Because 'Cause I'm
Yeah.
still creating something. So
Absolutely.
that to me is also art for sure.
Yeah.
It's I mean, and again, art is subjective, so it's like,
Totally.
what is art to you? Watcher or listener, what is art to you? Comment below.
What
No.
is it? Share. Tell us.
So I know you have to leave,
I do. Yeah.
to pick up your children. Let's skip straight to our moment of gratitude.
I'm really grateful for this interview, being a part of this conversation.
Yay.
I didn't know at the time how passionate I would be about having this conversation. I made a video when I was really angry because someone said like I wouldn't pay my grandma like $15 for that. I made a video about it and it went super viral and it I didn't know at the time, but I'm meant to be a part of this conversation, and I'm, just truly grateful that I can talk about it and that I can have conversations with other people about it because I do think it's really, really important, and I like to think that my grandma is, like, in her grave just, like, super proud of the fact that we're having these conversations because she had a small business and, like, busted her butt to create a life for herself too, especially after my grandfather died, and she made things happen with her art, and gosh, I wish she could have been paid a little bit more for what she made. So
Mhm.
I yeah, I'm just super grateful for the opportunity.
I'm thankful that you're here to talk about this too. And I feel
Oh,
like this is going to be a conversation that we continue to have, right? Like whether
totally.
it's on the
Yeah,
podcast or within the making app or, other social media channels, newsletters, all of that, like this is a conversation that should keep going and should
totally.
never stop. Um especially within our lifetime. I don't think that we will see, unfortunately, like the full realization of where we should be at, but we
Yeah.
will definitely be way, way closer to where we need to be as long as we continue talking about it. So,
I mean, even in the last decade, it's been huge
yeah,
leaps and bounds, so I'm hopeful. Maybe we
yeah,
could see it in our lifetimes.
awesome. You know what? I'm going to change it. We are going to see it in our lifetime because we are manifesting now.
We are. We believe in that. We're gonna make it happen. You know why? Because
Yeah.
we said so and to
Yes.
prove the patriarchy wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
you take that.
I am grateful for our friends at Barcelona Knits, which is a fiber festival in Barcelona. We're going to have a presence at Barcelona Knits. So if you're listening or you're watching and you're going to be
That's
at Barcelona Knits
amazing.
or you know somebody who's going to be there, we may or may not be doing this podcast live at Barcelona Knits. Things are happening. It's
What?
wild. And I'm
Oh,
very
that's so
excited for that.
cool. Very exciting. I'm excited.
We're still
Yay.
finalizing things, but it seems like that's
Very
gonna be the
cool.
way that we're gonna go, is that and doing some more interviews and telling vendor stories and such. We're gonna put in the notes all of the places that you can find Hannah, so make sure to go follow Hannah on the Making app and elsewhere. Go check out her amazing art and go to
Oh,
her
thank
website
you.
and support amazing artists such as Hannah.
Yay. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So I feel like there's so much that could be talked about fine art versus craft conversation. And then again, diving more into male versus female crafts and again, intersectionality and all of that. But I did post a question in the Making app and I wanted to take time to read some of these on this episode. And Hannah had to jet to go take care of her kiddos. So here we go. If we were to get rid of the words art and craft and just start over, what should we call what we do? Okay, so at Cooley Craft said, I call myself a textile artist as a means to combat this very debate. I feel really strongly about reclaiming the title of artist for folks outside the academic art world. This is such a fun question to discuss. It really is, and it makes me feel like we need to be having more of these episodes. Anika Maya says, I think of myself as a maker. Making things, although not my day job, is the thing that sustains my soul, which I agree. You know, I think craft is technically kind of part of my day job here at Making, but sitting down and like picking up my embroidery or my knitting at the end of the day is, whew, it always does something for me, you know? Worthy Design Studio says, as a person who studied design, I've never felt like I'm an artist. I always felt like art was something that was above me or unattainable or intellectual. I prefer to use the term maker these days because I feel that's what I am and where my strength lies. But you ask a good question. What is it that I'm making? Is it art? I don't think that my work is art. That's making me feel emotional. However, they do continue and they say, but everything that I make still holds meaning, creativity, and skill. Perhaps just not the depth of intellect that I personally associate with art. Shruggy emoji. And then in the little asterisk, goes off to contemplate what I actually do. Well, you know, I think that what you do is art. And I would love for you to challenge that within yourself because what you make is beautiful. The Olive Trees in the Moon says, oh, I love this question. I studied fine arts at university, and there was always this underlying message of, you're here to make art, not crafts, which was a connecting thread for everything we made. However, I've always been interested in the dividing line between both, including the art, currents, and history. Trust explored that too. A name for it, perhaps creating, put simply, or alchemizing, if we're feeling fancy, because all creation is sort of magical, really. I like that a lot. Amelia says, oh, interesting. I've always been fascinated by the dichotomy between fine art and where craft fits into this. I think that craft is art, but it has additional value of providing a tangible utility versus being a form of expression with no immediate use. That's really interesting. I like thinking of craft as art and utility. That's great. Megan says, I think all craft is art, but fine art implies a certain mastery over the media being used to create the art. Well, I would argue then, Megan, you are a fine artist of knitting because I have seen what you've made and it's wonderful. Dawn Catherine says, this is a complicated subject. I have a lot of opinions about it. You are not alone, Dawn. Trust. And the weight of the different words we use carry. I agree. I also think, as we talked about, like there is this power of taking certain words back. So I don't know, just throwing that out there. I think that this is at the beginning of a conversation, right? the reason I was really excited when Hannah said that she wanted to talk about this is it's something that I've wanted to bring to this podcast for a really long time. I even think that back when I talked to Terry about woodworking, we had talked about this a little bit too, and how we should have a podcast episode on it. And it's not worth just one episode. So I do think that this is something that we should continue to chat about. And if you have, any feelings about it, or you want to have a conversation, like drop a comment down below or go to the Making app and let's keep talking about it. Because again, it's really the only way that we're going to move forward is if we really bring these things to light and people continue to learn and grow together. So thank you so much for joining this week. I am so thankful that I get to chat with people every week and then get to share it with you all. I am so very grateful for being able to be a part of making and be a part of this community, because there is nothing more special than the community around us. And then throw in like all of this creativity of multi-craftualness. It's beautiful. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And, if you feel inspired, please share this with a friend, because, let's keep growing the community. To join the very first social marketplace app made for makers, crafters, and artists by makers, crafters, and artists, head to themakingApp.com. Download the app and join the amazing multi-craftual community. You won't regret it. Just so much inspiration and so many wonderful, wonderful humans. Did you know that you can also listen to the Making Conversation podcast in the Making app? Open the app, tap on Discover, and scroll down to podcasts. From there, you'll see all of them listed. We've also started putting these up on YouTube. If you're listening, there's a link down below to the episode on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, there is a link to listen. So choose your own adventure. If you've made it this far and you're interested in sponsoring Making Conversation or having Making at an event to collect content, amazing maker stories, vendor stories, etc., send us a note at hq@makingco.com. We would so very much appreciate it if you were to share the podcast with your crafting community, whether that's online or offline. Having more eyes and ears always feels real good. So thanks for watching and or listening, and we'll see you in the Making app.